Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot to love yourself? A love so powerful that you were willing to lose everything, your pride, your dignity, even your heart, just to see them smile? I did. I loved him in a way that felt like it consumed me, a love that was all-encompassing, so deep I never saw it coming when it all came crashing down. It was the kind of love you read about in books, the kind of love that leaves you breathless just thinking about it. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is. But he was perfect for me. From the moment we met, it was as if the universe had carved out a space for him in my life. There was something magnetic about him, something irresistible, and I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. I can still remember that first day. We were just two strangers at a party, both surrounded by people, but somehow it was only him I could see. He had this way of making everything seem effortless. The way he smiled, the way his eyes locked with mine, made everything else fade into the background. For me, in that moment, nothing mattered but him. And I thought, this is it. This is the person I'm meant to be with. It didn't take long for us to become inseparable. We were always together, talking, laughing, sharing our hopes and dreams. He had a way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world. We would stay up late, whispering to each other about the future, our future. I imagined it would be filled with nothing but happiness, that we'd always be there for each other. But, as with all love stories, there were cracks hidden beneath the surface, cracks I didn't notice until it was too late. In the beginning, everything was perfect. I believed in him with all my heart. He made promises, sweet promises that I thought would last forever. We built a life together, a life that I thought was strong and unbreakable. I supported him, encouraged him, even when things got tough. I believed that love could fix anything. He was my rock, and I was his. It felt like we were a team, two halves of a whole. But slowly, like a slow-moving storm that you can't see coming, things started to change. There were little signs, little moments that I brushed off. A text message he quickly hid when I walked into the room, an excuse when he couldn't meet me, an extra hour of work that turned into late nights. I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe that nothing could come between us. After all, I loved him more than anything. But the cracks were widening, and I was too blind to see them. I was too caught up in my feelings for him to notice the warning signs. You see, when you love someone too much, you tend to ignore the little things, the things that, if you looked closely enough, would show you that not everything is as perfect as it seems. It wasn't just him, it was me too. I had become so wrapped up in us that I stopped paying attention to who I was, to what I needed. All that mattered was making him happy. It was one late evening when the doubt first crept in. We were sitting together on the couch, as we had so many times before, watching an old movie. His phone buzzed. I could see the flash of light from the screen, but he didn't even glance at it. He simply turned it face down. My heart skipped a beat, but I brushed it off. It could have been anything, right? Maybe it was work or a friend reaching out. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I convinced myself that I was overthinking things. After all, he loved me, right? He'd never hurt me. He'd promised. He had to mean it. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something was off. The next few days were a blur. I watched as he grew distant. Though he tried to hide it, there were times when he seemed so unreachable, as if he wasn't really with me anymore. Even when he was sitting right next to me, it felt like he was slipping through my fingers, like sand through an hourglass. But I kept telling myself, it's just a phase. I loved him. I believed in us. But then came the day when the truth would unravel everything. The day that would change everything forever. It was a Friday afternoon when I walked into his apartment unannounced. I had a feeling. I don't know how to explain it, but sometimes you just know when something is wrong. Maybe it was the way he didn't answer my calls the night before, or the way he barely looked at me when we spoke. I didn't know what to expect when I opened that door, but I didn't expect what I found. I walked in and froze. There, standing in the middle of his living room, was her. I didn't even need to ask who she was. The look on their faces told me everything. They were caught. They hadn't even heard me enter. I could feel my chest tighten, my heart racing. I wanted to scream, to lash out, But all I could do was stand there, frozen in disbelief. The girl, the one I didn't even know, had her hand on his arm. And he? He was standing there, frozen, his eyes wide, panic in his expression. It took a few seconds for me to register what I was seeing, but once I did, the reality hit like a punch to the gut. He wasn't mine anymore. Not in the way I thought he was, not in the way I had given him my everything. And in that moment, everything I had believed about love, about us, crumbled. I stood there in shock, my body frozen, heart pounding in my chest. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching on forever. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to say or even what to do. The girl, her, stood there, her hand still resting on his arm as if she belonged. And he? He was standing too still, his expression one of guilt and fear. His eyes darted between me and her, but not once did he make a move to reach out to me, to explain, to reassure me. It was in that moment, the moment of raw, bitter realization, that I understood the truth. He had been hiding something from me. All those little signs I'd dismissed, all the moments that seemed off but I couldn't quite place, they all added up now. And there it was, plain and simple, betrayal. It hurt more than anything I could have imagined, more than I was prepared for. What is this? I finally managed to choke out, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. The girl looked at me, her face pale. She stepped back slightly, like she wasn't sure whether to say anything, or whether she even had the right to. But it wasn't her I was angry with. No, it was him. He was the one who had promised me his love, who had sworn he'd never hurt me. He was the one who'd promised we'd be forever. And now, standing there, I could see the truth. Forever didn't mean anything to him. I can explain, he finally said, his voice weak, and it only made me feel worse. He was stammering, looking for the right words, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He didn't have the right words. He couldn't fix this. He didn't even know where to begin. But I didn't want his explanation. I didn't want his excuses. I didn't want him to tell me how sorry he was, how he never meant for things to go this way. I didn't want to hear any of it. Because in that moment, I realized the only thing I'd ever truly wanted was his loyalty, his honesty, and I had nothing left of that. I turned to leave. My heart was in pieces, and I couldn't stand there anymore. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't hear him. But as I moved toward the door, I felt him reach out. His hand caught my arm, pulling me back just as I was about to leave. "Please, don't go," he said softly, almost desperately. "We can fix this. Just let me explain, please." I wrenched my arm away from him. "Fix this? How do you expect to fix this?" I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. I was trembling, the rage rising in me like a storm that I couldn't control. "You betrayed me. I loved you. And this is how you repay me? By bringing her into our lives? Into my life? No, there's nothing to fix, it's over." But he didn't give up. He stepped closer to me, his hands outstretched, as if he were begging me to stay, to listen to his side. "Please," he said, his voice now pleading. "I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you, just let me explain." But the more he spoke, the more it felt like I was sinking deeper into a hole. His words were empty. They were nothing but a string of excuses. I didn't want to hear them anymore. Every word he said felt like it was ripping apart the love I had given him, the trust I had built. I looked at him, my heart breaking all over again. And in that moment, I understood that there was nothing left for us. Not after everything he had done. I thought of the time we had spent together, the way he had promised me a future. I thought of the moments when he had held me close and whispered that nothing would come between us. But it wasn't just the physical betrayal that hurt. It was the emotional one too. The lies he'd fed me for so long. The way he'd manipulated my feelings for his own selfish desires. "Goodbye," I whispered, my voice steady despite the storm inside of me. I turned and walked out of that apartment, out of his life, without looking back. As I walked down the stairs of his building, each step felt like it was echoing in my mind, the sound of everything I had once believed crumbling beneath me. I had given him my trust, my heart, and he had shattered it all in one moment. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know where to go, who to turn to. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? But the truth was, I had loved him too much. And when you love someone that deeply, you forget to see the warning signs. You ignore the red flags, tell yourself they don't matter, that everything will work out. But it doesn't. It never does. I walked aimlessly through the streets, not knowing where I was going. I didn't care. All I wanted was to escape the pain, to escape the images of him and her together. I couldn't escape him. He was everywhere, in every corner of my mind, in every shadow of the city. He had broken me, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. Hours passed, but it felt like days. I ended up at the park near my apartment, sitting on a bench, staring at the empty space in front of me. My phone had been buzzing non-stop, text messages from him, calls, voicemails. But I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to know what he had to say. And then, it hit me. What did I want from him? What did I expect? He had already shown me who he truly was. The truth was, I didn't need him. Not anymore. The days that followed were a blur. I didn't know how to process everything that had happened. I had thought he was the love of my life, the one person I could count on forever. But the truth was, I had been living in a dream that he had fed me with his lies. Now everything felt shattered, broken beyond repair. I kept replaying the scene in my head, him standing there with her, his hands on her, as if I had never existed. I didn't cry at first. I couldn't. It was as though the shock had locked my emotions away. But at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, the tears would come. They came in waves crashing over me, and I would cry for hours. I would cry for the love I had lost, for the trust that had been destroyed. I would cry because I had given him everything, and in return, he had betrayed me. The worst part was that I didn't know who I was anymore. I had built my entire world around him, around us, and now that was gone. I didn't even know what it meant to love myself. I had been so caught up in giving him everything I had forgotten to keep something for myself. I tried to keep busy, distracting myself with work, with friends, with anything that didn't remind me of him. But no matter where I went, no matter what I did, his face haunted me. His voice echoed in my ears. The lies he had told me, the promises he had broken, they consumed me. And then came the anger. I couldn't deny it anymore. I was angry, furious even. I had trusted him, I had given him my heart, and he had destroyed it. How could he do this to me? How could he stand there and pretend like everything was fine, as if I didn't matter? The betrayal cut deeper than I had ever imagined. But what hurt even more was that I had seen him as my future. I had trusted him to be my forever. And in return, he had betrayed me, not just with her, but with the lies he had spun for so long. I began to think about what I wanted. What did I need to do to heal from this, to move on? I knew I couldn't go back to him. I couldn't just forget what he had done. But I also knew I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't let him control my happiness any longer. I had to take my power back. That's when the idea of revenge first crossed my mind. It wasn't about getting back at him for the sake of hurting him. No, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-worth. It was about showing him that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't someone who could just be tossed aside when he grew bored. I wasn't going to be the one who ended up broken and lost. I would show him that I could be stronger than he had ever thought. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about me, about taking control of my own life. I had been so consumed by my love for him that I had lost sight of who I was. But now, I was going to find that person again. I was going to rise from the ashes of this betrayal, stronger than ever. So, I began to make my plans. I didn't want to just walk away quietly. I didn't want him to think that his actions didn't matter. He needed to feel the consequences of what he had done. At first, I wasn't sure how I would go about it. But then I remembered all the small things he had done to me, all the little lies he had told, all the ways he had manipulated me. It was time for him to face those actions. It was time for him to see that what he had done wasn't something that could just be forgotten. I started small. I began reaching out to people who had been close to us, people who had seen the cracks in our relationship that I had refused to acknowledge. I wanted to know what they had seen, what they had noticed, and slowly, I started to piece together a plan to expose him for who he really was, to show everyone that the perfect image he had worked so hard to create was nothing but a facade. But as the days went on, something inside me began to change. I wasn't sure if it was the anger or the hurt, but I started to see the revenge I was planning as something more. It wasn't just about getting back at him, it was about taking control of my own story. It was about refusing to let him walk away unscathed. I wanted him to understand that actions have consequences, and I wanted to show him, and everyone else, that I wasn't a victim. I didn't know if my plan would work. I didn't know if he would even care. But I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. I was doing it because I deserved better than the lies he had fed me. I deserved better than the broken promises he had left me with. And so I started to prepare for what was to come. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my plan was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, restoring the balance he had so carelessly destroyed. I had given him my love, my trust, my everything. And now I had to take back what was rightfully mine. But how? How could I expose him, make him feel the weight of his actions, without completely losing myself in the process? I spent hours pacing back and forth in my apartment, trying to figure it out. I didn't want to stoop to his level, didn't want to be petty or vindictive. I wanted him to face the consequences of his betrayal, but I wanted to do it in a way that would give me closure, not just fuel my anger. I wasn't going to destroy him. No, I was going to expose him. His lies, his manipulation, everything he had done to deceive me and take advantage of my love. I knew I needed to gather evidence. I needed the truth, something irrefutable that would show everyone what he had done to me. But that meant I had to dig deeper than I had ever gone before. I wasn't just going to confront him and demand an apology. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of explaining himself. He had already used words to break me, and I was done listening to his empty promises. Instead, I began reaching out to those who knew the truth, the people he had hidden behind his facade. I talked to his friends, his colleagues, anyone who had seen what he was doing behind the scenes, and slowly, I began to piece together a picture of who he truly was. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't even close to the person I thought I knew. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that he hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed everyone around him. He had manipulated those closest to him, played people like pawns in his own selfish game. He had built a life on lies, and now those lies were crumbling. As I learned more, I started to feel something new, not just anger, but a sense of triumph. This was what I needed to move on, to finally put him behind me. I wasn't going to be the one left in the dust. I wasn't going to be the one forgotten. He was the one who would be exposed for who he really was. But as I dug deeper, I realized something else, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I wasn't doing this just for the revenge. I was doing it for the closure. I wanted to be free of him, free of the ties that had bound me to him for so long. I wanted to stop thinking about him, stop crying for him. I wanted to erase the memory of him from my mind, even if that meant exposing him to the world for what he had done. But there was a part of me that feared what would happen once the truth was out. What if he retaliated? What if he tried to twist the situation and turn it around on me? What if he tried to make me look like the villain, the crazy ex who couldn't let go? I had no idea what he might do, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be the one who came out looking weak. As the days passed, the plan began to take shape. I reached out to people who had seen the cracks in our relationship, people who had been there when things started to fall apart. I had them recount the moments, the conversations, the little signs they had witnessed that pointed to his infidelity. And as they spoke, I started to realize just how many people he had hurt, just how many lives he had affected with his lies. It wasn't just me he had betrayed, it was everyone. He had taken advantage of everyone's trust, and now it was time for the world to see the truth. But even as I was preparing to expose him, a small voice inside me whispered, "What will this really solve? What was I hoping to gain from this? Was it really about him, or was it about my own need to feel vindicated? To prove that I wasn't the one who had been in the wrong?" I didn't have the answers. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't go back to the person I was when I was with him, the person who had lost herself in love. I needed to move forward, to take control of my life again, and if that meant exposing him, if that meant showing the world the man he truly was, then so be it. The moment I started talking to people about what had happened, I felt a shift in the air. It was as if the burden that had been on my shoulders for so long was beginning to lift. I was finally telling my side of the story. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't going to let him rewrite our history, make me out to be the villain, the crazy ex. I was reclaiming my narrative, and it felt good. I spent days preparing, making sure I had everything I needed. I contacted a few people who could help me get the truth out there. People who would help me share my story without fear of judgment. I wasn't doing this for sympathy. I wasn't doing it to make people feel sorry for me. I was doing it for myself, for my own peace of mind, for my own sense of justice. And as I got closer to the moment of truth, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. I had a sense of clarity now, a sense of purpose. I was ready to let go of the pain, to stop carrying the weight of his betrayal. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. The moment of truth arrived quicker than I had anticipated. It was almost surreal, as if everything I had been planning was coming together in ways I hadn't fully expected. I had worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence, reaching out to the people who had witnessed his lies, and carefully preparing everything. The day I had been waiting for had come, and with it, the weight of my decision to expose him. I remember standing in front of my mirror that morning, the reflection staring back at me. I barely recognized the person I had become. There were no traces of the girl who had fallen so blindly in love with him. No, this person was stronger. This person had learned from her pain, and I could feel it. Deep down, I had become someone new. I wasn't just someone who had been betrayed. I was someone who was taking control of her own story, rewriting the narrative he had tried to force on me. As I made the final preparations, part of me still hesitated. What if I was making a mistake? What if the truth would do more harm than good? What if exposing him didn't bring me the closure I thought it would? But deep down, I knew I had to do this. I had to prove to myself that I could rise above it, that I could heal, and that I could do so without being tied to his lies any longer. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The confrontation was inevitable. But what I didn't expect was how much I would feel at peace afterward. The hardest part was getting to this point. It was the endless hours of internal struggle, the guilt, the anger, and the overwhelming sadness. But now, as the day unfolded, I felt like I was doing the right thing. I wasn't doing it to destroy him. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it for me, for the person I had lost and had now found again. As I pressed send on the final message, my heart raced, a mixture of dread and relief settling in my chest. I had exposed the truth. The messages were sent, the evidence shared. The world would know the kind of person he really was, and there was no turning back now. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, waiting for something, some kind of reaction. The reality of what I had done was sinking in, and I couldn't help but wonder how he would react. Would he apologize? Would he try to explain it away? Or would he try to make me look like the villain? I wasn't sure, but in that moment I realized something. None of that mattered anymore. The truth was out there. I wasn't in control of how he would handle it, but I was in control of how I handled it. The moment I had exposed him, I had taken back my power. I wasn't the one hiding anymore. I wasn't the one left in the dark, pretending like nothing had happened. I wasn't the one who would silently suffer. The days that followed were filled with chaos, but not in the way I had feared. There was no public scandal. There was no dramatic fallout. What I had expected to be a storm of accusations and anger turned out to be nothing. He didn't fight back. He didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he stayed silent, and in his silence, I realized something. He had already made his choice. He had already decided to walk away from me, to betray me. The truth wasn't something he wanted to face. It was easier for him to stay in the shadows, to keep hiding behind the mask he had so carefully crafted. But it wasn't easy for me anymore. The silence was deafening, but in a way, it was exactly what I needed. I didn't need to hear him beg for forgiveness. I didn't need to see him fall apart. I had spent so much of my life trying to fix things, trying to fix him, that I had forgotten one key fact. I wasn't the one who had broken anything. He had. It took some time, but I started to let go. It wasn't instant. The pain didn't disappear overnight. But every day I felt the weight of his betrayal lifting off my shoulders, piece by piece. I stopped looking for signs of his regret, stopped expecting some kind of apology. Instead, I focused on myself. I started to rebuild the life that I had left behind when I had become consumed by him. I started to think about what I wanted, what I needed, instead of constantly putting his needs above mine. I began to heal, and that healing wasn't just about moving on from him. It was about forgiving myself for letting it go on for so long. I realized that I had allowed myself to become so wrapped up in our love that I had lost sight of who I was, who I wanted to be. But now, I was reclaiming that. I was rediscovering the parts of me that had been buried beneath the weight of his lies. And as I let go of him, I started to understand something deeper. The betrayal hurt, yes. It shattered me in ways I didn't think I would recover from. But it also taught me a valuable lesson. I am stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I survived this. I moved on from it. I let go of a love that had consumed me. And in doing so, I learned how to love myself again. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need his approval, his validation. I didn't need him to feel the pain that I had felt. Because in the end I realized the most important thing was not what he had done to me. It was what I was going to do for myself. I had survived. And that was enough. It was strange at first. The silence. After everything had unfolded, after the truth had been exposed, I found myself in a kind of stillness I hadn't known for months. The chaos had settled, but so had my heart. I wasn't angry anymore. The pain was still there, but it wasn't the sharp, overwhelming ache it had been. It was more like a distant memory, something I could look back on but no longer feel in the same way. In the weeks that followed, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to reflect. Not just on what happened with him, but on everything that had led me to this moment. On everything I had allowed to happen. And most importantly, on everything I had learned from it. One of the first things I realized was that for so long, I had been living for someone else. I had poured everything I had into him, my love, my trust, my future, and I had lost myself in the process. I had been so focused on building a life with him that I had neglected my own dreams, my own passions, my own identity. When I finally allowed myself to acknowledge that, I was flooded with a deep sense of relief. It was like I had finally come up for air after holding my breath for far too long. The weight that had been sitting on my chest, the weight of loving someone more than I loved myself, began to lift. And in that space I realized something. I had a life to live, a life that didn't depend on him. I had spent so much time mourning the love that had been lost, that I had forgotten to look ahead at what was still waiting for me. The world was still out there, full of possibility, and I was still here. I had my own future to build, my own path to walk, and it was time I stopped looking behind me. It wasn't easy at first. The urge to reach out to him still lingered, and the fear of being alone crept in more often than I cared to admit. But I had learned the hard way that being alone wasn't as frightening as I had once believed. It didn't mean I was weak or unworthy. It meant I was strong enough to stand on my own, to forge my own way forward. I started spending more time with my friends, the people who had been there for me when I needed them most. They had seen the toll the relationship had taken on me, and they were there to pick up the pieces when I couldn't. I realized that I had been so consumed by him that I had neglected the people who truly cared about me. It wasn't their fault, and I had to make it right. I began to repair the relationships I had let slip away, and I found comfort in the people who had always supported me. And then, something changed. One afternoon, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, just enjoying a quiet moment to myself. I hadn't felt that calm in months. As I sat there, I overheard a conversation at the table next to me. Two people were talking about their own experiences with betrayal, and I couldn't help but listen. Their story was different from mine, but there were parallels: the pain, the loss, the uncertainty. But what stood out to me was the way they spoke about it. They weren't angry, they weren't vengeful, They had moved on, they had healed, and they had learned something valuable, that betrayal, while painful, doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after it. In that moment, I realized something. I had been holding on to my pain for too long. I had been using it as a shield, a reason not to move forward, but the truth was, my betrayal had only been a chapter in my life. It wasn't the whole story, and it certainly wasn't the end. I walked away from that coffee shop with a new sense of clarity. I didn't need to hold on to the hurt anymore. I didn't need to keep reliving the moment when everything had fallen apart. I had learned my lesson. I had loved too deeply, too blindly, and I had let someone else's actions define my happiness for far too long. But that was over now. I knew that my journey wasn't finished. It wasn't about revenge anymore, or about making him feel the weight of his lies. It was about embracing the person I had become in the process. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been before. I had faced the darkness, and I had come out on the other side. And now, I was ready to embrace my future. I started pursuing the things I had put off for so long. I enrolled in a course I had always wanted to take but never had the time for. I began traveling, visiting places I had dreamed of, making memories that didn't involve him. And with each new experience, I began to feel the chains of the past loosen, one link at a time. But there was one thing I hadn't expected, one thing that changed everything for me. As time passed, I found myself forgiving him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger I had been carrying. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about him at all. It was about me. It was about freeing myself from the pain, the resentment, the emotional weight that had been holding me back. When I forgave him, I didn't do it for him. I did it for me. I did it because I wanted to move forward, because I wanted peace. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift I could give myself. The forgiveness didn't come overnight. It wasn't some grand, cathartic moment where everything fell into place. No, it was something I had to work through, piece by piece, day by day. But as I slowly let go of the anger, something inside me began to shift. I stopped thinking about him with bitterness. I stopped seeing him as the person who had shattered my world. Instead, I started to see him as part of my past, a past that had taught me more than I could have ever imagined. Forgiving him didn't mean I was letting him off the hook. It didn't mean that I was pretending his betrayal hadn't hurt. What it meant was that I was refusing to let him have any more power over me. I was refusing to let his actions continue to dictate how I felt. He had taken enough from me already. I wasn't going to let him take my peace of mind too. I remember the day I realized I had truly forgiven him. It wasn't some dramatic revelation, but rather a quiet understanding that washed over me one afternoon. I was sitting alone in my apartment, flipping through a photo album, when I came across a picture of the two of us from when everything was good. We were smiling, carefree, and I couldn't help but smile at the memory. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment looking at that photo. I felt nostalgia. And in that nostalgia, I found a strange kind of peace. That was the moment I knew I was ready to move on, not just from him, but from the version of myself who had clung to the pain for so long. I realized that I didn't need to carry that burden anymore. I could remember the good moments, honor them for what they were, and let go of the rest. But as I moved on, I started to understand that healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt strong, when I felt like I had conquered everything. And then there were days when I still felt that familiar ache, that sharp pang of longing for the life we almost had. But with each passing day, the pain became more bearable, more manageable. I wasn't erasing the memory of him. I was simply learning how to live with it, how to use it as a stepping stone to something better. In the months that followed, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried for so long. I had forgotten who I was without him, who I was outside of our relationship. I started to rekindle my passion for writing, something I had once loved but had put aside for the sake of us. I took trips, explored new places, and met new people. I felt like I was finally becoming the person I had always wanted to be. Not someone defined by someone else's love, but someone who defined their own life. It was during one of these trips, when I was standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean, that I truly understood the importance of everything I had been through. The wind was blowing softly through my hair, and I looked out at the vastness of the ocean, vast and endless, just like the future I had ahead of me. And in that moment, it hit me. I had survived. I had survived the heartache, the betrayal, the lies, and I was stronger for it. I didn't need him to complete me. I didn't need anyone to define my worth. I had learned that the only person I needed to be whole was myself. I had the power to heal, the power to rebuild, the power to love again. And this time, it would be on my terms. But what I hadn't anticipated was the wave of gratitude that came with all of it. Gratitude for the lessons learned. Gratitude for the strength I had found in myself. Without that betrayal, I wouldn't have found the courage to take the steps I needed to move forward. Without it, I wouldn't have realized just how much I was capable of. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't deny that it had been the catalyst for the person I was becoming. I don't regret my love for him. I don't regret giving him my heart, even if he didn't deserve it, because in the end, I didn't lose anything that truly mattered. What I gained from it, the self-awareness, the growth, the resilience, was far more valuable than anything I had thought I had lost. I also realized that sometimes we don't get the closure we think we need. I never got the apology I wanted. I never got the conversation that would have given me the answers I was searching for. But what I learned was that closure isn't something that someone else can give you. It's something you create for yourself. It's about finding peace within yourself, even when the world around you doesn't offer the answers you seek. As I continued on my journey, I started to believe in love again, but not in the way I once had. I had loved him with all my heart, and it had led me to this place. A place where I had learned to love myself first, and that was the most important lesson of all. Because only when you truly love yourself can you fully embrace the love that comes from others. I wasn't afraid of love anymore. I wasn't afraid to open my heart again, but this time I knew it would be different. This time I would protect my heart, not out of fear, but out of respect for myself. Because I had learned the hard way that no one else could ever define my worth. I had learned to trust myself again, and that trust, that belief in my own strength, was something that no one, not even him, could ever take away from me. Time passed, and slowly the scars from the betrayal began to fade. I wouldn't say that I was over what had happened. You never truly get over a heartbreak of that magnitude. But I was beginning to see it for what it was, a chapter in my life that had taught me valuable lessons. I had learned the true depth of my own strength. I had learned what it meant to stand on my own, to trust myself again, and to build a future that was mine and mine alone. It was strange, really. There was a time when I couldn't even imagine a life without him in it. He had been my everything, my world, and when he was gone, it felt like the world had crumbled beneath me. But now, as I looked at the life I was building, I saw something entirely different. I saw me. I had taken the pieces of myself that I had once abandoned and put them back together. I had started living for myself, and for the first time in a long while I felt complete. But even with all the progress I had made, there was still one thing I had to confront, one thing I had been avoiding. It wasn't him. It wasn't even the memories of us. It was the feeling of closure, or, more accurately, the lack of it. The last time we spoke, he didn't fight for me, he didn't apologize, he didn't even try to explain himself. He had simply disappeared, leaving me to pick up the broken pieces. I had always wondered why. Why had he done it? Why had he betrayed me in the first place? Was I not enough? Was I never enough? As I continued to rebuild my life, I found myself asking those questions less and less. I knew the answers, even if I didn't want to admit it. The truth was, he had his own issues, his own insecurities, and they had nothing to do with me. He had betrayed me because of his own flaws, his own weaknesses. He had chosen to lie and hide because he didn't have the courage to face the truth, his truth. But even knowing that, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to hear it from him. I needed him to say the words I had been waiting for, "I'm sorry." I needed him to acknowledge what he had done, not for the sake of punishing him, but for the sake of my own healing. I needed to know that I wasn't crazy for loving him, that it wasn't my fault that things went wrong. So, after months of silence, I made the decision to reach out to him. It wasn't an easy decision. I had spent so long trying to forget him, trying to build a life without him in it. But in some strange way, I felt like I needed this conversation to complete my journey. It wasn't about reopening old wounds, it was about finding peace with the past and finally closing the door on it for good. I sent him a message, simple, direct. I didn't expect much, just an acknowledgement. I wasn't asking for a grand apology or for him to beg for my forgiveness. I just needed to hear from him. I needed him to understand how much he had hurt me, how much his betrayal had affected me. I needed him to understand that it wasn't just about him and me. It was about me reclaiming my own sense of self-worth. The reply came a few hours later, and my heart skipped a beat as I read his words. He didn't say much. There were no apologies, no explanations. But there was one thing he said that struck me deeply. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to handle everything. It wasn't the answer I was hoping for. It wasn't the apology I had wanted. But in that one line, something clicked for me. I realized that this wasn't about me. It was about him. It was about his own inability to face the truth, to deal with his own demons. He had run away because he didn't have the strength to confront the mess he had created. He had chosen the easy way out, by lying, by hiding, by betraying me. And in that moment, I felt something shift within me. Not anger, not resentment, but a quiet understanding. I didn't need to hear any more from him. I didn't need him to explain himself. I had already forgiven him. In my own way, I had already moved on. This message, this brief exchange, was just the final piece of closure I needed to let go completely. For the first time, I felt nothing but peace. I didn't need him to apologize anymore. I didn't need him to give me the answers I had been searching for, because in that moment, I realized that I was the one who had given myself the closure. I was the one who had healed. I had rebuilt my life, my self-worth, and my strength, not because of anything he had done, but because of what I had done for myself. And that realization was the most freeing thing of all. As the days went on, I stopped thinking about him as much. The memories didn't hurt anymore. I could look back at the time we had shared without feeling pain. I could appreciate the good moments, but I no longer mourned what had been lost. He wasn't a part of my present anymore, and I was okay with that. I was stronger than I had ever been. I had built a new life, one that was mine and mine alone. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge. Not that I had exposed him, not that I had gotten back at him in any way. The greatest revenge was that I had survived. I had come out of the other side of this heartache not just healed, but stronger, more confident, and more in control of my own life than I had ever been before. I had learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I had always been complete, and with that understanding, I was finally free. The days after our final exchange felt oddly liberating. I had received the closure I had longed for, but more importantly, I had discovered something far more valuable: my own resilience. It wasn't about the apology or the answers I thought I needed. It wasn't about him at all, really. It was about me finally realizing that I had been my own strength all along. But even though I had come to terms with the past, something in me told me that there was still more to this journey. A lesson that I needed to learn before I could fully embrace my future. And as much as I thought I had already healed, there was still a deep, lingering question inside me that I couldn't ignore. What would it take for me to truly believe that I was worthy of love again? I had spent so much time in the shadow of that one betrayal that I had forgotten to look at the bigger picture. I had been so fixated on him and what he had done to me that I had forgotten about all the other possibilities life had to offer. It wasn't that I feared love. It was more that I feared the vulnerability that came with it. I feared being exposed again, being hurt again. And even though I had learned to love myself and regained my independence, there was still a part of me that was scared of giving myself fully to another person. I was afraid that the cycle of heartbreak might repeat itself, that I would once again give my heart to someone who would take it for granted. But one evening, as I was sitting in my living room surrounded by the quiet comfort of my own space, I had a revelation. I was ready. I wasn't scared anymore. I had come so far, and I knew deep down that I had healed enough to embrace love again, not as a way to fill a void, but as a way to add to the richness of my life. I didn't need someone else to complete me. I was already whole. But that didn't mean I had to shut myself off from the possibility of finding someone who would walk beside me, someone who would respect, support, and love me for who I was. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to share my life with them. And so, I decided to take a step forward, not just in my own journey, but in opening myself up to new possibilities. I wasn't looking for a replacement for him. That chapter was closed. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I was simply opening myself up to the idea of love again, of connection, of sharing my life with someone who truly deserved it. The first few steps were awkward. I went on a couple of dates, met a few people, and while there was nothing wrong with them, I quickly realized that I wasn't ready to rush into anything. I had spent so long healing and rediscovering who I was that I needed time to fully understand what I wanted in a partner, and more importantly, what I wanted in myself. But through those experiences, I learned something important. The fear of getting hurt didn't mean I should close myself off. It meant I needed to approach love differently. I needed to be discerning. I needed to take things slowly. I needed to prioritize my own well-being and happiness, not just try to make someone else happy. And most of all, I needed to trust that I was enough on my own, and that if someone truly cared for me, they would see me for who I was, not as someone who was broken or incomplete, but as someone who had grown stronger and more whole through the struggles they had faced. I didn't need anyone to fix me. I was already fixed. I was already whole. And that was the mindset that would guide me as I entered this new chapter of my life. Months passed, and I found myself in a much better place. I had learned to embrace my independence, to love myself fully, and to understand that love isn't about finding someone to make you happy. It's about finding someone who shares your happiness, supports your growth, and respects you for who you are. I wasn't looking for perfection. I wasn't looking for someone to heal me. I was looking for someone who could walk beside me as I continued on my journey of growth and discovery. I didn't know where that journey would take me, or if I would find the kind of love I had always dreamed of. But I did know one thing: I was no longer afraid. I had faced my fears, I had learned to forgive, and I had built a life for myself that was full of purpose and meaning. I knew now that I was worthy of love, not because of who I was in relation to someone else, but because of who I had become through the trials I had faced. And as I looked toward the future, I realized that the most important love story I would ever have was the one I was building with myself. Only after I had truly learned to love myself could I truly open my heart to the possibility of sharing it with someone else. But for now, I was content, I was complete, I had survived, and that, in itself, was enough. As time continued its steady march forward, I found myself no longer haunted by the past. The shadows of betrayal that had once consumed me had faded into the background, and I no longer looked over my shoulder, waiting for them to catch up with me. I had learned that healing is not a linear journey. It comes in waves, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, but always transformative. And as I moved through the days, I began to understand something powerful. I had lived through the worst of it, and I had come out stronger. But the most unexpected part of my journey was this. In the quiet of my healing, I discovered a deep sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal itself, but for the lessons it had taught me. Without that pain, I wouldn't have learned what it meant to truly love myself. I wouldn't have come to understand that my worth was never tied to anyone else, that I was complete all on my own. I wouldn't have known how strong I truly was, how capable of rising above the hurt, and how resilient I could be. And while there were still moments of sadness, there were no longer moments of self-doubt. I stopped questioning my worth. I stopped questioning my capacity for love. I realized that the person who had betrayed me was not the person who had defined me. I was the one who had defined myself, my character, my strength, my heart. As I stood at the precipice of this new chapter, ready to face whatever the future had to offer, I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would never again compromise my happiness for someone else's. I would never again allow myself to be a reflection of someone else's idea of love. I had my own definition of love now, and it began with respect, trust, and kindness toward myself and others. I promised that I would never again lose sight of who I was in the name of love. I had learned that the greatest love I could ever offer was the love I gave to myself. With this new sense of purpose, I stepped forward, embracing the unknown with open arms. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of getting hurt, of making mistakes, or of loving again. I had already lived through the worst, and I knew now that I had the strength to face anything that came my way. Love would come when it was meant to, but it would come on my terms, and I would be whole when it did. As the years went on, I found that the hurt I had once carried had transformed into wisdom. I was no longer the girl who had been shattered by betrayal. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself, who had learned to rise from the ashes, stronger, braver, and more capable of giving love than ever before. I understood now that pain, though difficult, was not something to fear. It was something to learn from, to grow through. And in doing so, we find the pieces of ourselves that we never even knew we had. Love is complicated, it's messy, it's raw, and yes, sometimes it's painful. But it's also beautiful, and it's something that should never be rushed. The love you give yourself is the foundation for all the other love that will come your way. And once you've truly learned to love yourself, to honor your worth and your dreams, that love becomes a beacon that guides others to you. People who will love you for exactly who you are, without expectations, without games, and without betrayal. So as I look back on everything that has happened, I no longer see it as a story of heartbreak. I see it as a story of transformation, of redemption, and of self-discovery. The love I thought I had lost, it was never really gone. It had always been there, waiting for me to recognize it, waiting for me to understand that the greatest love story I would ever live was the one I shared with myself. And now, with this new perspective, I walk forward with confidence, knowing that whatever comes next will be met with a heart full of wisdom, strength, and a love that is unwavering. Not just for others, but for myself.